For over a decade, Are You Being Served? Delighted audiences with its cheeky humor, colorful characters, and outrageous antics on the shop floor of Grace Brothers. It became a British comedy classic, bringing laughter to millions worldwide. But while the series lives on in reruns and fond memories, real-life tragedy touched many of the talented actors who made it so special. In this tribute, we remember the beloved stars of Are You Being Served? Who have sadly passed away, celebrating their comedic genius, their contributions to television history, and the bittersweet goodbyes that remind us how fleeting even the brightest lights can be. Nicholas Smith was born on March 5, 1934, in Banstead, Surrey, England. He would become forever remembered as Cuthbert "Jug Ears" Rumbold in Are You Being Served, a character marked by nervous smiles, awkward loyalty, and a certain helplessness that mirrored much of Smith's own hidden struggles. Beneath the laugh tracks and powdered wigs lay a soul that carried more silence than applause. His childhood was gray and bitter. Raised during the last stretch of the Great Depression and the turmoil of World War II, Nicholas was the only child in a working-class household scraping to get by. His father, a railway worker, lost his job during the war and spiraled into depression. Nicholas, often left alone, buried himself in books and voices, mimicking sounds, rehearsing lines, imagining lives more colorful than his own. Drawn to acting not for fame, but as an escape, he trained at RADA and slowly found his way into stage work. But recognition came late, and rejection was relentless. Before Are You Being Served? Took off in 1972, Nicholas had contemplated giving up acting entirely. Even during the show's peak, his role as Rumbold was seen as secondary, comic relief at best. He felt it too. While the audience laughed, he often sat in the dressing room afterward, wondering why the applause never reached his heart. He was a quiet man, gentle and inward, with a penchant for poetry and music. But he found it hard to connect. Fame, even modest fame, only deepened the gulf between him and real companionship. His marriage to Mary Smith, though lasting, was not without long winters of emotional silence. They had one daughter, but Nicholas was often more present in scripts than in conversations at home. He loved deeply but could not express it without a role to hide behind. As the years passed and the series ended in 1985, roles dried up. He tried theater, voice work, anything to avoid the empty hours. The laughter he once heard from studio audiences faded, replaced by long evenings filled with memories he wasn't sure he wanted. Nicholas Smith passed away on December 6, 2015, from complications after a fall. He was 81. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $1.5 million. Modest for a man who gave so much of himself to the screen. But money was never what he sought. What he wanted, truly, was to be heard, to matter, beyond the punchlines. In the end, he was not just Rumbold. He was a man who wore comedy like armor, hoping someone might see past the grin and ask him if he was really okay. Born on July 21, 1922, in Keighley, West Yorkshire, Molly Sugden would go on to embody one of Britain's most iconic comedic characters. Mrs. Slocum, the flamboyant, unpredictable, and sharp-tongued saleswoman of Are You Being Served? But behind the dyed hair and double entendres was a woman carved by war, loss, and the quiet ache of wanting to be seen. Molly's early life was shadowed by austerity. Her family, modest and struggling, moved to the industrial town of Featherstone when she was a child. Her father lost his job during the Great Depression, and her mother, while resilient, grew distant under the weight of survival. Molly learned early to perform, not just on stage but in life, to cover up the hunger, both for food and affection. During World War II, she worked in a munitions factory, packing explosives by day, dreaming of theaters by night. Her escape was acting. After the war, she trained at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, but roles came slowly. She was typecast, overlooked, and often rejected for being too bold or too northern. It wasn't until Are You Being Served? Premiered in 1972 that the world finally noticed her brilliance. As Mrs. Slocum, she was loud, commanding, and full of color, a contrast to the deeply private woman who rarely let her true feelings show. Fame arrived late in life, and even then she never quite believed it would last. Molly's greatest tragedy was her inner loneliness. Though she married fellow actor William Moore, their relationship was tested by the pressure of show business and their differing ambitions. They had twins, but she often said the stage was her first child. She masked her pain with laughter, playing outrageous roles to distract from the quieter rooms of her heart. Her career post-Slocum never reached the same heights, and as audiences moved on, so too did the spotlight. In her final years, Molly was quietly heartbroken by the deaths of her friends and castmates. The laughter they shared on set became memories that haunted her. She remained devoted to her fans but rarely appeared in public, preferring solitude over staged affection. Molly Sugden died on July 1, 2009, in Guildford, Surrey, after a long illness. She was 86. At the time of her passing, her estimated net worth was around $2 million. A number far smaller than the joy she brought, but also far larger than the love she felt she received. Behind every outrageous wig and feline pun, she was a woman who once said in an interview, "I only ever wanted to make people laugh, because I knew what it was like when no one did." Frank Thornton, born on January 15, 1921, in Dulwich, South London, will always be remembered as the upright, immaculately dressed Captain Peacock in Are You Being Served? A man of dignity, order, and polite condescension. But beneath that polished exterior was a performer who had spent decades chasing validation, navigating the quiet wounds of missed chances and fading relevance. He was born into a family of modest means, the only child of an insurance clerk. Theirs was a disciplined, emotionally restrained household, and young Frank quickly learned that feelings were best buried beneath a firm handshake and correct posture. This stiffness followed him into adulthood, giving him a natural ease in playing authority figures, even when he himself often felt anything but in control. Frank served in the RAF during World War II, a period he rarely spoke of. The war left him with a subdued grief, not for what he lost, but for the years that slipped away. After the war, he trained at the London School of Dramatic Art, and then began the long, thankless climb through repertory theatre, bit parts, and forgettable cameos. Success never came easily, and for years he played nameless clerks and snide bureaucrats, always on the edge of recognition but never quite embraced. Are you being served? Change that. As Captain Peacock, Frank finally had a name, a suit, and a voice people remembered. Yet he struggled with the shallow nature of the fame that followed. While the world laughed at Peacock's pompous airs, Frank feared he had become trapped in the caricature, typecast, frozen in time. His later attempts at serious theater were met with polite applause but little acclaim. Even his role in Last of the Summer Wine late in life felt like a quiet admission that the deeper roles he craved would never come. In private, Frank was reserved, often distant. He was married to Beryl Jane Margaret Evans for over 60 years, a stable but emotionally muted union, held together more by loyalty than passion. They had a daughter, Jane, but his long hours and constant worry about work kept him absent even when he was home. As his health declined, Frank became more withdrawn. He hated the idea of being remembered only for one thing, and yet, that was all people ever brought up. The laughter he had helped create no longer echoed in his own life. Frank Thornton died peacefully in his sleep on March 16, 2013, at the age of 92. At the time of his passing, his estimated net worth was around $3 million, a quiet fortune for a man who never saw himself as wealthy in anything but roles played. In his final interviews, when asked if he was proud of Captain Peacock, he simply said, "He kept the floor in order. I just wish someone had done the same for me." Trevor Bannister was born on August 14, 1934, in Dington, Wiltshire, and rose to fame as the cheeky, woman-chasing Mr. Lucas in Are You Being Served? With his wide grin and effortless swagger, he became the face of youthful rebellion in a store full of stiff collars and withering glances. But when the camera stopped, Trevor was a man quietly haunted by time, missed chances, and a fame that vanished quicker than it arrived. He grew up in post-war austerity, the son of a builder who expected him to follow a trade, not a dream. Money was tight, and so was affection. Laughter came sparingly in the Bannister household, and Trevor often turned to mimicry and charm as a way to break the silence. Acting became both a rebellion and a refuge, a place where he could be anyone other than the boy who was told he'd never make it. After training at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, Trevor spent years grinding through repertory theatre and forgettable TV appearances. When he landed the role of Mr. Lucas in 1972, he was 38, older than the character he played, but still full of hope. Lucas was cocky, bold, and beloved by audiences. But as the series went on, Trevor began to feel boxed in. The charm that had once brought laughter now began to feel like a trap. He longed to stretch himself as an actor, to be more than just the comic flirt. In 1979, when he left the show, it wasn't with triumph but with quiet disillusionment. He returned to the stage, but the spotlight was dimmer now, the roles less certain. The world moved on, and he often found himself answering questions about Mr. Lucas instead of the person he was still trying to become. Trevor's personality off-screen was far gentler than the brashness he portrayed. He was introspective, fiercely loyal, and prone to long silences. His marriage to Pamela Carson was strong, but not untouched by the weight of his career frustrations. They had 3 sons, though he often admitted he wasn't always there, physically present but mentally auditioning elsewhere, as he once said. He remained active in local theatre and pantomime, finding joy in the smallness of it all, far from the BBC studios, surrounded by honest laughter. Yet, he carried the ache of being a nearly man, someone who could have been more if only the right door had opened. Trevor Bannister died suddenly of a heart attack on April 14, 2011, at the age of 76. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was around $1 million. Modest. Quite like him. To many, he was forever Mr. Lucas, winking, smiling, full of mischief. But to those who knew him, he was a man who wanted to be taken seriously, even if the world only remembered the jokes. Mike Berry was born Michael Hubert Bourne on September 24, 1942, in Northampton, England. Though he joined Are You Being Served? Late in its run, playing the youthful, guitar-strumming Mr. Spooner from 1981 to 1985, his career began long before the bright lights of Grace Brothers. And behind his easy grin and pop star past was a man wrestling with the weight of fading fame and the silence that followed. In the early 1960s, Mike was a rising star of British rock and roll. His single, Don't You Think It's Time, cracked the charts, and he toured with legends. But the Beatles stormed in, and the scene changed. Overnight, Mike became yesterday's sound. He kept singing, kept showing up, but the crowds grew smaller, the headlines disappeared. Music, once his lifeline, became a reminder of what almost was. Television offered a lifeline. In 1981, when he stepped in as Mr. Spooner, he brought youthful energy to a show nearing its end. But Mike knew, even as the laughs rolled in, that he was replacing rather than originating. Spooner was cheeky, fast-talking, and a bit lost, much like Mike himself. The role gave him recognition, but not renewal. When the show ended in 1985, so too did his brief return to the mainstream. Mike was always warm and approachable, but deeply self-critical. He married Susan in 1962, and they raised 4 children together. While he adored his family, he often felt he was living in 2 worlds, the devoted husband and father at home, and the restless artist who still dreamed of standing under spotlights that had long gone dark. He never chased excess, but he never stopped chasing something. A second hit. A different role. A fresh chance. In the years after Are You Being Served? Mike returned to small gigs and nostalgia tours. He smiled through them all, but privately, the applause began to feel like an echo of something too distant to reach. He loved performing, but feared becoming a caricature of his younger self. Mike Berry is still alive today, a quiet figure in the background of British entertainment. As of 2025, he is 82 years old, and his estimated net worth is around $800,000, enough to live comfortably, but never quite enough to erase the sense that he was built for something more. He remains gracious, grateful, but there's a wistfulness in his voice when he speaks of the past. Mr. Spooner may have arrived late to Grace Brothers, but Mike Berry had already lived a lifetime of near stardom. His story is not one of collapse, but of slow fading. A man who once touched the edge of fame, only to find himself walking quietly behind it. Wendy Richard was born Wendy Emerton on July 20, 1943, in Middlesbrough, England, but her childhood was far from stable. After the suicide of her father when she was just 11, her family's world crumbled. She and her mother relocated to London, where Wendy began masking sorrow with polish, elegant, composed, and always on. But even then, she knew how to wear a mask, and she would wear many throughout her life. As Miss Shirley Brahms in Are You Being Served? 1972 to 1975, Wendy brought sass, style, and working-class charm to the shop floor. With her thick Cockney accent, sharp tongue, and unapologetic confidence, she became a symbol of modern womanhood in a dated world. But the public rarely saw the fragility beneath the bold lip color and flirtatious retorts. She left the show in 1975, despite its success, a quiet act of defiance against typecasting and the shallow roles being offered. Behind the camera, Wendy's life was filled with loneliness and heartbreak. She longed for love but found herself in a string of turbulent relationships and brief marriages that left her more bruised than beloved. In interviews, she often joked about being unlucky in love, but there was sadness behind the humor. A woman who could hold a room's attention but struggled to hold onto someone who truly saw her. Wendy's most enduring role came later as Pauline Fowler in EastEnders, which she played for over 20 years. Audiences saw her grow older on screen, but few realized how much pain she carried off it. In 1996, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, beginning a long and brutal battle that returned again and again. She kept filming through treatments, quietly enduring, not for the spotlight, but because acting was the one thing that made her feel alive. Her marriage to painter John Burns in 2008, late in her life, was her fourth and briefest, a final attempt at lasting companionship before the end came. Wendy Richard died on February 26, 2009, at a London clinic after a long and defiant fight with cancer. She was 65. At the time of her death, her estimated net worth was $2.5 million. But no amount of money could buy the peace she chased her whole life. She once said, "I don't think I've ever really been happy. Not truly." And yet she brought joy to millions. Miss Brahms was glamorous, funny, fierce. Wendy was all those things too, but also fragile, wounded, and desperately human. A star who kept shining even when no one noticed the light was flickering. John Inman was born Frederick John Inman on June 28, 1935, in Preston, Lancashire, a town defined by hard work and harder silences. His family owned a modest drapery shop, and from a young age, John understood the weight of appearances, standing straight, speaking properly, hiding what didn't fit. Even as a child, he learned that some parts of himself were safer unseen. He moved to London at 13, where theatre became not just an escape, but a revelation. On stage, he was no longer the quiet boy from the north. He could be flamboyant, clever, outrageous. Are You Being Served? Gave him the stage of a lifetime. As Mr. Humphreys, mincing, playful, and deliciously ambiguous, John became a cultural lightning rod. Audiences adored him, critics were divided. But beneath the laughter and catchphrases was a man exhausted by the role he could never shed. Mr. Humphreys was bold, John was shy. Mr. Humphreys was fearless, John, in real life, was deeply private, especially about his sexuality in an era when queerness was still whispered. For years, he denied being gay, not from shame, but from a lifetime of being taught silence was safer than truth. He was a master of timing, of reading a room, of being what people wanted. And sometimes that meant being no one at all when the lights went out. Though Are You Being Served? Brought him fame, it also trapped him. Casting directors saw only one thing. He struggled for serious roles, for reinvention, but was met with polite refusals and typecasting. In pantomime and cabaret, he found some joy, audiences still loved him, but the work was often light, never deep, never enough. For years, John lived with Ron Lynch, his lifelong partner. Just 2 years before John's death. It was a love kept out of the spotlight, private, gentle, the one space where John didn't have to perform. He never had children, though he often expressed a quiet yearning for something bigger than just applause. Inman was diagnosed with hepatitis A in 2004, and his health quickly declined. He died on March 8, 2007, at St. Mary's Hospital in London. He was 71 years old. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $3 million, a sum he earned through decades of laughter, but one that couldn't buy him the dramatic roles. John once said, "I've spent most of my life being funny, not because I always wanted to, but because people didn't know what to do when I was serious." His Mr. Humphreys may have been free, but John lived in the narrow spaces between applause, yearning not to escape them, but to be seen within them. Arthur English was born on May 9, 1919, in Aldershot, Hampshire, a town steeped in military tradition, where laughter was earned, not given. Raised in a working-class family, Arthur left school early, working odd jobs and performing in local clubs, using humor as both shield and sword. But the war came, and with it, a kind of quiet fracture in his spirit, one that never fully healed. Serving in the British Army during World War II, Arthur witnessed the collapse of certainty and the randomness of survival. After the war, he returned to a country rebuilding from rubble. It was during this fragile period that he sharpened his act, developing a stage persona full of quick wit and sharper edges, a spiv, in cheap suits and smoother words, always talking faster than life could catch him. He joined Are You Being Served? In the mid-1970s as Mr. Mash, the store's wisecracking maintenance man, and immediately brought rough-around-the-edges charm. Mash was irreverent, cheeky, and always poking holes in the pretensions of Grace Brothers, much like Arthur himself. But off-screen, the smile faded quickly. His stint on the show was short-lived, lasting only 2 seasons. Some say he clashed with producers, others say he simply didn't fit the clean lines the BBC was trying to preserve. After Are You Being Served? The roles dwindled. He never reached the fame of his castmates, and the industry quietly turned its back. Arthur found himself slipping from memory, performing in pubs and local theaters, the stage lights dimmer, the laughs fewer. He never complained, but his eyes betrayed a man who once stood at the edge of something greater, and watched it drift away. His personal life was marked by grief. His first wife, Ivy, died tragically young in 1975. Their daughter, Patricia, remained one of his few anchors. He remarried later in life, to Teresa Mann, but the spark of companionship seemed dimmed by years of solitude and rejection. Arthur's home was often filled with silence, broken only by old comedy routines and the rustle of forgotten scripts. Arthur English died on April 16, 1995, at the age of 75. At the time of his passing, his net worth was estimated at $500,000. Modest, even by the standards of his generation. No gold statues. No grand farewell. Just the memory of a man who made people laugh when he could, and drank alone when he couldn't. To some, he was just Mr. Mash, the man with the broom and a sly joke. But to those who looked closer, Arthur English was a survivor of 2 wars, one with the world and one with himself. And though he didn't always win, he never stopped showing up, waiting for the next laugh, even when no one was listening. Joan Sims was born on May 9, 1930, in Laindon, Essex, the only child of a stationmaster. Her early years were quiet, structured, and shadowed by loneliness. Laughter was rare at home, and from a young age, Joan learned that humor could be her voice, her armor, and her invitation into a world where she might finally belong. She trained at RADA, where her natural comic timing and expressive face quickly set her apart. Stardom arrived with the Carry On films, where Joan became the beloved queen of innuendo, always the loud, blustering woman hiding aching vulnerability beneath pancake makeup. But this typecasting would become both her triumph and her trap. In the late 1970s, she made a cameo as Mrs. Slocum in the Are You Being Served? film, stepping into a role defined by Molly Sugden and briefly borrowing the character's tight curls and tighter dignity. Joan's version was sharp-tongued and proud, but unlike her comedy persona, Joan herself was fragile, craving stillness in a world that only wanted her noise. Despite her dozens of film and television appearances, Joan struggled with crushing insecurity and chronic loneliness. The laughter she inspired in millions rarely echoed in her own life. Her personal relationships were fleeting and often unfulfilling. She never married and had no children. Behind the scenes, she battled severe depression, and as the years wore on, she turned increasingly to alcohol for escape. In the 1980s and 90s, as roles dried up and her health deteriorated, she slipped further from public view. Friends described her as kind, sensitive, and heartbreakingly self-effacing, a woman who gave everything to audiences and left little for herself. She once admitted in an interview, Joan Sims died on June 27, 2001, following complications from liver and heart conditions. She was 71. At the time of her death, her estimated net worth was $1.2 million, built from a lifetime of performances where she made others laugh, even when she could not. Her legacy is immortalized in British comedy, but the tragedy of Joan Sims lies not in her death, but in how little the world knew of her while she was alive. She wore her wigs and painted faces like armor, hiding a woman who longed to be seen not as funny, but simply loved. Which character from Are You Being Served? TV series 1972 to 1985 holds a special place in your heart? How does it make you feel knowing that some of the beloved cast members are no longer with us? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share them in the comments below. If you've been enjoying this content, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.